Good evening, everyone, for another Tuesday evening. It's good to be here. Not too sure what's happened to the weather. Nice for a bit. Now it's cold and miserable and so forth and so forth. But it is spring, April showers. So what do we expect? So good evening and welcome to everyone. If you're watching on catch up, you're not able to do Tuesday night. I know some of you have got family stuff going on Tuesday night. But if you're watching later on, another welcome. Thank you for taking the time out. We'll be around about 30 minutes tonight, looking at moral injury and intimacy hijacker. Certainly like to thank somebody who will remain nameless in the States, who just wrote very, very simply, "Oh, it's a pity you're finishing the series." And it just made me think. And and I just looked at things a bit more. So just to say welcome. And certainly writing the article last week, I paused for a long time as I wrestled with what I was writing and knowing that some people have a real deal with. Good evening, Sonia. Really good to see you this evening. Thank you very much indeed. Just got something. I don't know where my sound engineer is. In fact, I said to her during the week, I said, "Where were you?" I was having some food. Well, great sound engineer you are. Anyway, so tonight we're looking at moral injury. An intimacy hijacker. But also I'd like to make an announcement for those of you watching. In fact, there's somebody who I met last week and I saw the name, but I didn't know who it was. And the person's been watching for ages, never ever commented, but watched pretty much most weeks. And I just happened to bump into a hotel. We got chatting and she made a comment. And then I remembered her name. And then anyway, long story. So yeah, really welcome to everyone this evening. The announcement I'd like to make, I became a granddad last week. My first grandson, Zion, fantastic name. Zion Wesley, which is my middle name, Robert. And he's got his parents' surname. So I'm right chuffed, as they say in Sheffield. So so I'm a granddad for the first time. So looking forward to taking him swimming and all that type of stuff, but not yet, not at the moment. So we're looking at this evening, moral injury and intimacy hijacker. I'd also like to thank those of you who've reached out with the articles, my posts and my thoughts, and that you've interacted. I really do thank you. Those that also one or two people have more than one or two have contacted me, and that this moral injury has given them understanding to what's been happening to them in their places of work. So moral injuries, came out from the war, from the Vietnam War, but also there's an understanding now that moral injuries doesn't just happen on the battlefield. Thank you, Sonia. It doesn't happen on the. In fact, just before we go there, slight break. You can imagine, baby, beautiful, all the rest of it, and all the message we get. Oh, isn't he beautiful? And I said, of course he's beautiful. Just look at his granddad. So no wonder he's beautiful. Just look at his granddad. Anyway, that's another conversation for another time. But so there's an understanding now, slow understanding that people. Moral injury doesn't just happen on battlefields, but people begin to understand it happens in workplaces. But also, there's still this blurred line between moral injury and burnout. A lot of the things that we're saying is burnout is not burnout, moral injury. And I suspect if it's moral injury, there could be legal implications, and I might say a little bit about that later on. So organizations, we might want to say it's more burnout because it's about how the person has worked, so the responsibility is put on them. But moral injury quite often has to do with the places of work and how ethical or unethical they are, and it's clashing with their employees. I think I remember telling you some time ago, Alison McDermott, a business consultant who was brought in to Sellafield to do some work with them, and she said something like 11,000 staff, less than 11% had any trust in the leadership. So that's really serious if you've got staff of 11,000 people and less than 11% have any confidence or trust in the leadership. So that's when you can get things like moral injury, and there's ways around that for leaders. So if you're a leader, if you know leaders, there is ways around dealing with moral injury, and I'll say a bit about that in a bit. So how could we not talk about intimacy and moral injury? It became apparent to me as I explored this topic. Well, certainly if it's impacting on us physiologically, in our bodies and our hearts, in our minds and emotions and so forth, it must have an impact on us intimately. Now, not much research has been done There's some research been done on moral injury and sexual assaults in the forces. There's lots of work around that, but and people have been victim of sexual assaults, but very little about intimacy and also romantic relationships. However, I do want to add something from the army. Little research. There's something called the genitourinary urinary injuries. So that's to do with the sexual reproduction organs and the urinary system within our bodies. Little research on that, but as time has gone on with wars, more and more male soldiers in particular are having major trauma and injuries to their sexual, reproductive and urinary tract part of their bodies. And what's happened, the research that they've done, there's high rates of PTSD, depression and suicidal behavior when service men are being injured, understandably so, in that kind of genital area. Medical staff indicate when soldiers have been injured in war, so they cite one incident where a soldier had been involved in a blast, and when he awakened from the blast and he recognized that both of his legs were damaged from the knee down, the first thing he says, "Hey, check my nuts." So that's, now we may laugh at it, but it's something really important for men. The whole thing around maleness and masculinity, identity. So we won't be talking about that today. I don't feel qualified. All I'll be doing possibly is just regurgitating information that I've seen. But today we're talking about intimacy, and I'm defining intimacy as close relationships. Intimacy, as you know, doesn't necessarily mean sexual interaction, but certainly there's a kind of closeness and so forth. So, as I said before, that as I kind of reflected on moral injury, it's inconceivable how it cannot interfere or not interfere with our romantic and close relationships. So we've described moral injury over the last few weeks as a form of stress affecting our entire humanity, where our existential and foundational building blocks of our lives are structured, and then there's a kind of shift due to some sort of external thing, some external happening, and then somehow that affects our entire humanity. So it affects our relationships, and I'll say a little bit more about that as I read a particular part of an article that I've shared during the week. It does affect our relationships, close, intimate, and romantic relationships. Current lack of research on intimacy, but it is supported by the American Psychological Association. They've said this, so they've done some research. It said, overall, these findings suggest that moral injury plays a pernicious role in many veterans' issues in relationship problems with their spouses or partners. Future research needs to examine the potential utility of addressing moral injury among veterans who are struggling to meet demands for intimacy and connection in their intimate and romantic relationships. So there's an acknowledgement, there's an understanding that's on the battlefield. And I started to think, yes, that makes sense. But what happens if individuals are experiencing moral injury in the workplace? I know from working with individuals, I know that marriages have ended, relationships have ended because the levels of stress and anxiety brought about by moral injury has just made a massive impact on couples and their families and so forth. So I was left wondering, how has moral injury affected those who are office-based and not battlefield-based? Reflecting on this important topic brings how I think about Western medicine with all its benefits, all the things that is done. It still compartmentalizes our lives. However, in some areas that is changing, where there's an understanding that it's not just our heart here, but there's a whole interconnection of our bodies, life, society and so forth. There's an interaction, there's a relationship that's going on all the time. One of the areas that I want to give an example in this terms of compartmentalization is in the world of sports. They do have sports psychologists, but the sports psychologist's primary role, and if I'm incorrect, I'm sure somebody will contact me, the primary role is to get the athlete back out there doing what they need to do. Quite often, sports psychologists is to do with performance, and they don't always do quite well on the emotional stuff. So let me give you a further example. If an athlete is injured, or a football player is injured, there is this focus on getting them right again, getting back out on the pitch and all the rest of it. What's not taken into consideration sometimes, or seems to me oftentimes, is the impact this has on their relationships, their family, their children. However, I've been told it's changing, because I do know of somebody who is a counselor who works with a sports psychologist who's working with athletes to kind of work through this stuff. What impact does this injury have on you? You can't compete, you can't play, and you might not be able to do that for the next 6 months. I have been an athlete, and I know what it's like when we can't train, we get moody, temperamental. Admittedly, I'm not at the level of professional footballers, but in a sense, I understand the athlete's mind when we're not training, when we're not competing. And I know that with football players, for example, they want to play. They don't want to be on the bench. They want to be out there doing their stuff. So I think I've been told it's beginning to change, but perhaps it's not changing quick enough. So the impact of moral injury, as I've associated it, that when it happens, people's lives are really, they're kind of adrift. And what happens, this, what I'm going to use now, is taken from the world of abusive relationships and sexual abuse, but it happens in the workplace as well. I read it very recently on something I was looking at, and it's called Delroy, D-A-V-R-O. Let me just put it in the box so at least you can see it. Delroy. There you go. Oh, is it? Yeah, there it is. Yeah, Delroy. So this is used, as I said, it for abusive relationships, but also in the workplace. So let me paint the scenario. And somebody shared with me some time ago that reading this and listening to the post, it's really helped them it gave word and understanding to what they were going through. So let's just use this as a scenario, and it happens many, many times. You're an employee and the work has a particular ethical code, but you see somebody who breaks it systematically, and you then pluck up the courage to go and say, look, I've just seen you do this. It's not the first time we've done it, and I just need to kind of say something about it. What happens, so it could be something that they've done, so malpractice, inappropriate behavior. So what happens then is escalated. You then speak to your manager about it, because the company has this idea of being ethical and so forth. So you report it, you're then called into a meeting, and you have the expectation that the investigation has been trying to prove your point. But when you get into this meeting, you realize you are the victim. This switch, it's been flipped on you. You've done nothing wrong, but you're the one who's now blamed. And Delroy, D-A-V-R-O, is deny. So the person who's accused denies it, blames it on you. Then there is an attack on you. The VR is the victim reversal. So then you then are the one that's targeted, and you are the one who's the offender, not the person who's committed the act. So you can imagine you go into a meeting with an expectation that the investigation is going to be fair. The findings will prove your point, but you're blindsided. And there's a really interesting video on LinkedIn with I think she's a solicitor who talks about this Delroy, whereby what happens with people in the workplace, they go in expecting a fair trial, that they'll be heard, and then you realize you're the one who's targeted, and then you're the one who's then seen in trouble. So what can happen? Moral injury can be prevented by moral leadership. And moral leadership is where the leaders are motivated for people to do the right thing, even in the temptation of denying it. So moral leadership is what's needed at this place. But what happens quite often, people join ranks, they close ranks, and then you are targeted. You're the victim. And then what's happened with individuals, they're suspended, dismissed, sacked, or there's constructive dismissal. There's a way of actually getting rid of you. All this, as you then begin to question your sanity, your identity, has major implications on your relationships, your kind of distant relationship, but certainly your close and intimate relationships. There are major difficulties there. So it's about trust. So I'll say a little more about that in a moment. So this thing called Delroy, deny, attack, reverse victim, you're now the offender. It puts you in a spin because you can understand you've gone into this meeting. In fact, what this individual says, if I'll perhaps put it in the link later on for those who want to see it. Excellent video, about 2 or 3 minutes. So when you go into meetings like this, you need to go in with some legal representation. You can't just go into these meetings. And certainly if you know that the leadership can be a bit untrustworthy, don't assume they will be on your side. Now, I've got no axe to grind because I'm not working for an organization. I've not heard any stories in the sense that I'm not talking about a particular institution, but I read a lot and people talk to me and I know what's going on in many of our institutions. So there's an excellent article which you would have seen. I put in fact, an excellent article. Let me just see if I can get the link. Here we go. See if I can put it in the chat box. At least you can get the link if you've not seen it before. Let's have a look here. Whoa, there you go. More than likely to see it on, more likely to see it on YouTube, not on LinkedIn, unfortunately. Yeah, so I'm still not on Facebook, but I think I know a way how to get Facebook people to watch my stuff on YouTube. So there's a link. If you're able to just copy it and use it for further research, please do. So so this article by the psychologist talks about moral injuries, about trust. And you can imagine when trust is shattered, one of the things you really don't do very well, when your trust is shattered, you don't trust anyone, even somebody who might be loyal. And what can happen, because you're heightened with what's happening at work, the slightest thing that normally you would have been able to deal with in a relationship, it kind of, the relationship can actually splinter. Your partner may want to be supportive. You misinterpret something because you're so heightened, and that puts further strain on the relationship. So moral injury, Michelle DeMarco says, it's about trust, specifically the loss of safe connection with self, society, and the world. So your workplace was once safe. Now it is an unsafe place to be. Who do you trust? You can't trust your manager, the leadership, perhaps even the worker who you've been close to. There is just this sense of lack of trust. And then if it's really vicious and pernicious, you then start mistrusting the close people, your family, and so forth around you. The clash between a person's conscience and overwhelming edge experiences, which uniquely defines moral injury, alienates them from life-sustaining relationships. So when we don't trust, we withdraw. But that's kind of part of the conversation, part of the argument. So as you can see, that this work that needs, in terms of restoring people, is a bit more than a redox bath. Those of you that remember redox, or having a hot cup of tea, or having some turmeric milk, it's going to be a bit more than that. And what she talks about, that what the individual needs at that time is a re-establishing bond of self-worth and life-sustaining relationships. But it's really difficult because you don't trust anyone at the moment. But that's what you need. You need trusting, loving, caring relationships. You need human contact. Now, one of the things, I'll say this, and some may totally disagree with me at all, but one of the things about intimacy, and certainly with the sexual encounter, it can be used for many things. Yes, one, there's this whole thing around enjoyment, but also sex can be used to manage anxiety. So this is what can happen in a situation whereby you've got somebody who's experiencing moral injury. They're questioning their sanity. They don't trust anyone. There can be withdrawal. So there's a withdrawal from intimacy, even holding and hugging. There's a withdrawal from that. Or there can be the other end of the spectrum, where it's almost as like that sex is used to reduce levels of anxiety and so forth. Or what can happen in some instances, if the person is experiencing moral injury and the whole life is kind of in confusion and unstable, and if they're with somebody who doesn't understand what's taking place, this can be the ground for illicit relationships, though, where normally this person wouldn't do anything like that, because life is in such chaos and so forth, that we end up doing things that we wouldn't normally do. So this moral injury is a real kind of serious business when our values have been shattered and our belief system has been fractured, and there's like an existential crisis. Who am I? What do I believe? Is this place? I've worked hard for my for this organization, and now this is what they've done. They've thrown me under the bus. I walked into this meeting expecting me to be supported, and I realize I've not been supported. Oh gosh, all hell breaks loose. So despite this this perplexing paradox of moral injury, what really is needed is nurturing relationships, and it's a silent cry. And those of you who read the article, one of the things in over 30 years of being a therapist, I don't think I've ever heard anybody come to me and say, Delroy, I'm looking for peace, but that's what they want. So the whole thing around whatever they bring to the situation, whether it's self-harming, whether it's eating disorder, whether it's anxiety or depression, peace is hidden in all that, even though they never asked for it. So as I said before, the relationship, the intimate relationship can go ways in which they never ever anticipated. But when we're in a state of shock and things have been so destabilized as a loss of equilibrium, we cannot say what we will or won't do. Right. So what is needed, as I said before, is re-establishing of human connections. How do we do that? And it was here that I hesitated, because one of the dangers I had was just writing a few things as if this is just a 2-step, 3-step, 4-step, 7-step series. Do this, do this, do this, and you'll be fine. One of the things I do know is this, and those of you that have experienced moral injury, whereby you've been signed off work, you've been treated badly at work, and you've worked hard, you've been loyal for the organization, and then they throw you under the bus. Now, this might be kind of a process, but one of the things I do know is this. It may be a process over a few weeks or maybe a few months, but it can take you a long time to recover. It's a slow work. It's a slow recovery in rebuilding trust, feeling well again when your life has been so disrupted. So human connection is pivotal. And as I was thinking on this, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it seems as though out of this is kind of might come another series to look at the importance of human connection, where you feel safe, where you feel protected. And let's be honest, we're looking at moral injury, but for many people, I know many people, they're talking how unsafe they feel in the world. But what's needed during that time, there's so much that we have no control over, but what we really need, thank you, sound engineer, thank you, but what we really need is those kind of nurturing, stable relationships that almost can help us to begin to trust in human relationships again, and it takes time. And one of the things I'm going to finish, there's so much more here, but I think one of the things I want to say is this. When people have experienced moral injury, this goes back to the compartmentalization of Western society. Quite often, all the focus is given onto that individual. But as I'm reading this and I'm doing some thoughts around it, not only the individual needs supporting, but their family needs supporting, almost like a family therapy, because there will be an impact of this individual on their family or their relationships. So we don't experience moral injury in isolation. There is a consequence. There's a consequence in how we relate to our place of work and our work colleagues around us. What can happen in lots of places, you clearly have been victimized. Your work colleagues have seen you being victimized, but for whatever reason, they decide to remain silent. So you're on your own. So there's no trust within your management, with your work colleagues. So you either continue working there in isolation, and more that you do that, you, as I always think, that you become more and more unwell. But then when you leave, I've said to individuals that I always make a point, you know, when somebody's leaving a job, I say to them, okay, you're leaving today. When you're starting the new job, and I'm kind of pulling my hair out sometimes. They finish on the Friday, they're starting a new job Monday, and maybe there's financial implications. But I say to folks, listen, give yourself. I remember talking to somebody quite some time ago. I said, give yourself a break. He said, what do you mean? I said, you've started one place and it wasn't going very well. And I tell you how bad it was. You start someplace, and I said, see if you can shift your new place for a couple of weeks. Now, the company the person was leaving, on the last day, the manager asked him to start a project. So that told me clearly that guy should have got the hell out of there, and he did. So, and I think he had a week or 2 weeks off just to decompress and get himself ready to start another job. If it's possible, I know it's not always possible. When we leave, well, certainly if you've experienced moral injury and it's a really bad case, I don't think you can walk straight into another job. You're so messed up, you cannot function in another job. So it means then you have to take the time to recover. And recovery takes time. It's being in loving, supporting relationships, being able to tell your story maybe over again until kind of you get to a place whereby that story, in a sense, it's run its time, but you're with people who are supportive, loving, and caring, and it takes time. I know that all of us are under financial straits, but believe you me, I'll tell you this: you leave one job where you've experienced moral injury and you walk into another one, you won't last very long in your new job. And then what that does, it compounds your feeling of being vulnerable, of failure, shame, and so forth. And it just makes things really, really worse. But I know that we live in a time where you know, perhaps we haven't got the extra finance. But I can say to you that if you are in a workplace, and I've met individuals, and I shan't say where I've met them. I've met individuals who quite clearly see what's going on in the workplace. And I remember one particular individual, she said, well, and there was this old idea that came up about leaving. She said, I can't leave now, but I said, could you leave in a year's time? She said, yes, I could. I said, right. Then the question is, how are we going to manage the coming year? What strategies are we going to have in place? So in a sense, you plan your exit. And if you're listening to this and you see some of the signs that if you continue down a particular path, the support structure is not there. They may talk, but the support structure is not there. You see what's happened to other people. I'd be encouraging you to think about exiting now before something happens to you. You then make some comment and statements, and then you end up being called in to a meeting thinking that there's going to be support of your actions, but you find out you're the target, you're the victim, and then you start experiencing all those symptoms of moral injury. So that is that for this evening. So moral injury, it damages relationship, it damages trust, and it damages how we relate to individuals, and it damages our close intimate and romantic relationships. One of the things I wanted to say, let me just, as I end this session, as you know, that this is not, I don't, in fact, it's only going to happen on, unfortunately, it's only going to happen on YouTube. That I've never, this is 4 years now, I've never ever charged, but I do ask if folks want to make a donation. But maybe some of you would like to buy me a coffee. So I'll put a link in the chat box if you want to buy me a coffee. I never say no to coffee. No milk, sometimes a bit of honey in it, but I do have it black. So buy me a coffee. There's a link there and it will tell you what to do and so forth. But anyway, I'll be here next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. I suspect I'll be looking at moral injury a little bit long, maybe just for a week or two, because I realize how widespread it is in places of work. And if you are seeing some signs and symptoms, what you can do before things get too bad, do an exit strategy. You might not be able to do it over the next couple of weeks, but think about your future. Believe you me, listen, prevention is better than cure. If you can sort something out now before you fall or you slide down the slippery slope of moral injury, which could take weeks or months to recover, I would really encourage you to do something from now. Either go and see a therapist. Therapists are really good at giving you strategies and ideas how you can deal with it, or you can watch numerous moral injury videos and look at some of the strategies how you can protect yourself, because one of the things you need to do is to learn how to protect yourself. When we are messed up psychologically, emotionally, our bodies start to malfunction, and the amount of things that can happen to us, those normal things of our is it the autonomic nervous system that regulates breathing, heart and all the rest of it, when that is out of sync, we are heading for some form of long-term disaster, diabetes and so forth and so forth and so forth. So moral injury and intimacy hijack, and it does hijack close relationships. Wish you well. Thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of the week. It's my daughter's birthday today. They're 29-year-old women, absolutely gorgeous women, great women, do me proud. So they are, it's gone out on the airwaves. And again, thank you for those of you that are interacting either the broadcast or the thoughts I shared yesterday. When I was texting somebody, I just shared a thought. In fact, it just came out as I was texting them, and I shared it on LinkedIn. Something like over 500 impressions. So just really grateful for people take the time out just to interact. Really grateful indeed. So enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your week. Look after yourself as best you can. Look after one another. Again, if you're working with individuals, you see what's happening, share this video with them, or share some of the videos with them, share the articles with them for read. At least if they can be prepared, they can. Is it forewarned is forearmed? It's better to be forewarned, do something about it, than to sink into it and then you saying to yourself, "Oh gosh, I wish I told you," or they're saying, "Oh, you should have told me." Let's see if we can escape this moral injury business. So wish you well. Enjoy the rest of your evening and your week. Go well. Take care. Speak to you soon. Bye.